Alabama legislators are getting a 4.3% raise to $54,000, while teachers are getting a 2% raise to all the way up to $41,700. Okay? I mean, wow. I will say, just somewhat controversially, I think that legislators should be well compensated. I think that it is reasonable for legislators to be well compensated because, look, I know that it feels good to say, screw politicians, right? They don't deserve anything, and they, I hope they, they can pound sand and take $0 for all I care. And look, that feels good, and for the majority of them, that's like what they're worth, right? Republicans and Democrats, that's about what they're worth, is $0. But if you had a very low salary for elected officials, that would preclude working people from trying to become their own representatives. To the extent that such a thing happens, to the extent that such a thing can happen, having a low salary makes it even more difficult for working people to justify quitting their jobs or putting their careers on hold to run for office. So, we do need to have a decent salary. And so $54,000 to be a state legislator, which once you add per diem and travel, it probably ends up being, reasonably more than that.
But it certainly does. and it's worth pointing out that this is for approximately about 3 months of work out of the year. Of course, there's always the risk of special sessions. And that's not to say that, legislators do not do work outside of the session. They should. They should be meeting with constituents, responding to constituent phone calls and emails, all the things that, you're taught in elementary school your representatives are supposed to do as representatives of the community. But, generally speaking, you're talking about 3 months or less away from home.
Yeah, definitely. So it's, principally I'm not opposed to a $54,000 salary for state legislators. But what I am opposed to is politicians setting their pay above teachers. I am definitely opposed to politicians saying it is okay that I get paid $54,000 a year, plus per diem, plus travel, plus expenses, while educators make $41,700 a year. That is nonsense. That's absolutely nonsense. And I don't pretend to be a mind reader. I don't pretend to know the thoughts and intentions of the governing majority in the Alabama legislature. But if one were to want to destroy public education, if one were to want to stick money in people's pockets that profit off of private education, that profit off of charter schools, off of parochial schools, off of these non-public education things, if I were to want to do that and destroy working Alabamians' ability to get an education as a right as a citizen of this state, that's what I would be doing. That's what I would be doing. If that's what I wanted to do, I would make teacher pay so low that it is almost not worth the degree. You pay as much for a college degree in this country, or more, for a college degree in this country than your salary.
Right. And
that's insane.
And I think it's also worth noting that the starting salary that we're referring to at around $41K, it just now got into the 40s. I believe last school year. So, it was lingering down in the 36, to 39 range for most of the last decade. I know my first year as a classroom teacher, it was around 36. And like you pointed out, Jacob, that's if you're lucky, you got your degree for that amount of money.
Yeah, if you're lucky. I know a fellow that has $100,000 in student debt from a math degree at UAH.
Yeah, and something that is not necessarily unique to the teaching field, but is something that maybe not everyone realizes, that to become a teacher, you're going to spend an entire semester before you graduate and walk across that stage with your degree and get your, Alabama teaching certificate. You spend a whole semester as a student teacher or an intern.
Right.
And, it's kind of interesting in that you are essentially paying the university to do a full-time job.
Right.
So not only do you have all the commitments of a full-time job, you're there 5 days a week, you show up when the teachers do and you leave when the teachers do. And believe me, that is not from 8 to 3.
Right.
And so you are doing the full-time teaching load, full-time responsibility, full-time schedule, while also, coordinating with your supervisor as an intern, in the college to make sure you're getting your credit for that. You're working with your coordinating teachers, all while still paying full price tuition for this whole semester.
And all this, teachers making an abysmal salary while now going through year 2 of a pandemic where, contrary to what you will hear on some shows, was not a vacation for teachers. And we can see this basically objectively, because if it was a vacation for teachers, if they had such an easy time of this, then more than half of educators in Alabama would not be considering quitting. We would not have historically high resignation rates in our schools. We had 300 staff in Huntsville city schools alone resign in the last school year. In Huntsville city schools alone. How can you justify saying that this past year and a half, going on 2 years, has been a vacation when you start off making below the state's median salary for being a college-educated worker with oftentimes tens of thousands of dollars of student debt? And I mean, it's obscene. It's obscene that our educators are being taken advantage of this. And so the way to change that, of course, is for educators to organize and and for their communities to support them where they do so, and for them to have more control of their profession and of their working lives, because their working conditions are our children's learning conditions. And there's an Alabama Education Lab that has been doing a lot of really good work, and Adam's going to be diving into that over the next couple of weeks, and maybe he can give us some good in-depth analysis on that from the perspective of somebody who worked in the teachers union and who was a rank and file educator. But one of the key takeaways that the Alabama Education Lab came away from looking at quote-unquote high-flyer schools, which are schools in high-poverty areas which had above the national average proficiency rates in math and science and reading and such, was that here's a crazy thing. Teachers take control. Teachers have control of their classrooms, and they're supported in the things that they need. That's not happening in so many schools across our state right now. Teachers are being disrespected, not well compensated, being told that they're on vacation, being told that that they're indoctrinating children, and that they don't care about their students. Which why would you go into education if you don't care about the next generation? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned those last two things. I want to tease out a little bit because, for one thing, the indoctrination and this sort of manufactured hysteria over critical race theory and other curriculum issues, that's not entirely new. I mean, we've had textbook wars for decades. whether it's about teaching evolution in the classroom,
right,
or teaching, any sort of diversity. So that's not new, but it has been reinvented and kind of reinvigorated. And yes, some of that is in response to the Black Lives Matter movement and in response to, I think, folks clinging to old ideology, seeing it start to fracture, especially among young people who aren't quite as bigoted as they should be, in their eyes, quite frankly. So some of that is in response to changing conditions culturally. Some of it is yet another way, I think, like Trojan horse, that phrase was used earlier about a contract, and I think that is a Trojan horse.
Right.
This is a way to stir up angst and rage among far-right elements. It's a way to confuse and scare parents. But what is ultimately going to be behind this is, yet again, the drive to privatize and the drive to put public tax dollars designated for the public education system into private hands, private pockets.
Exactly.
Ultimately, that's what it all traces back to. And that's not to say that some of these people, don't believe in this. Of course they do. There are folks out there who are just, dead set against your children learning that there are people who don't look like them, or that perhaps, just maybe, the United States of America was not always the good guy for the past 400 years in our history from colonial times onward. So yes, there is legitimate ideology there, but it's always, always connected to interests who are looking to put the public dollars in their private pockets. Teachers absolutely care about their students, and not just teachers, all educators. That includes your bus drivers, your cafeteria workers. Right. I heard a very moving interview with some bus drivers in Kentucky this week. And they were going around checking on those families and those kids that they know they've built relationships with, and checking to see which ones were still alive after these devastating storms. And those are the type of burdens that our education workers take on and take in their hearts and souls, and they feel it. And there's a reason why there's a mental health crisis among education staff, because it's not a job that you simply can clock out and disappear from your mind and you not think about it. You lay awake at night in bed thinking about those kids and the hardships they're experiencing. You're thinking about the home lives that they have. And oftentimes what's happening outside of school for those kids is way more impacting on their education performance, quote unquote, than anything you're doing inside the school. As hard as you're trying to reach them, to support them, you as a school, you as a teacher, even you as a school district, you can't fix poverty.
Right.
And I think in our state and in our country, we have designated the public school system as sort of the last stopgap measure to just fix all of our social ills. But, Miss Jones, the English teacher, cannot reverse the fact that so many of her students are living in poverty, or that so many of her students are being plagued by not just drug addiction, but by the negative impacts of the war on drugs and the fact that they have parents who are incarcerated in a discriminatory way. And on and obviously I could go on here, but I think it is kind of I'm glad you brought it up in terms of the pay raise disparity between legislators and educators. 2% is certainly not enough, and they deserve so much more. And beyond just salaries, as you mentioned, the working conditions are really a need to. Organizing is going to be the solution because right now in the state of Alabama, as a teacher, you're guaranteed theoretically 30 minutes free of supervision and teaching responsibilities. So all the time that you have to spend planning your lessons, inputting your grades, communicating with parents, going to meeting after meeting, most of them bogus, filling out all sorts of data and paperwork and, responding to dictates from central office and your admin. oh, this is supposed to happen within a 30-minute window. And oh, by the way, the law has no teeth, so if your school or administrator arbitrarily violates that and takes up your planning period every day of the damn week, they can get away with it.
Right. Exactly.
So, educators, we have to organize.
Yeah.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.